I think that leads us into our next and final discussion. Who is going to end up starting for Ohio State at quarterback?
And I think it's interesting because I think all three of us throughout the evaluations of the three, we've kind of, I guess, tipped our hand of who we all think is the best out of the three, which is Julian Sayin. And then obviously we still had a lot of good things to say about Will Howard. And we also still wanted to make sure that we said that Air Noland is a good quarterback, but out of the three, he's probably the least favorite of the three of them. I think before we get into the major point of the conversation, because it's not just about on the field play, there's more to this whole story. There's a fourth quarterback. There's five quarterbacks at the moment, I believe, that are on scholarship at Ohio State. But the fourth one, which we have not talked about, we didn't do a dedicated video for, but his name deserves to be mentioned because I know there is a contingent of Ohio State fans and possibly players who are big fans of him, and we're hoping to see him over McCord in 2023, which is Devin Brown. And there was a inside story about a controversy that happened, and I'm not going to get all into it because I don't know all the facts. But I sat down with a guy who follows Ohio State very, very closely, and he was telling me about a situation that could have or possibly did occur that was an internal issue between coaches, boosters, and players that possibly led to McCord getting the start. Now, I don't know how true that is, and again, I don't know all the details, but I do know that through that there was a large amount of people that wanted to see Devin Brown that got disappointed and thought that he should have been the one playing. Now, in our film, me and Chance actually got to look at some of the spring game from Devin Brown, and then we also just we looked at McCord and then these guys. Uh, McCord and Brown, both in the spring game that we watched, neither of them looked very good. And I think despite the stats looking pretty good for McCord, I don't think anybody is under the illusion that he was a great quarterback for Ohio State. I think a lot of people are happy that he's gone. But Devin Brown, compared to what we've seen in the film for these three guys are all better options than him. And I think that's kind of why we didn't do a full breakdown for him, despite him being there for a long time and a lot of people liking him, is that there's way more upside to us when we watch these three other options versus him. Now he could very well surprise us and be the guy, but I would probably say he's not going to be. And then also there's a fifth guy on the roster, and I don't even quite remember his name at this moment, who is under Devin Brown on the depth chart. So to me, like those two, they don't quite hit the level as the three that we're discussing here, which is why they didn't have dedicated videos.
Yeah, my thing when it comes to that is if Devin Brown is going to be your starter, I see, Air Noland was recruited to come to Ohio State as a quarterback. Obviously, I think they know that he's a very raw player and a
Mm,
very raw talent that they will have to coach for a year or two before he turns into something that is applicable on a football field. Now, Kyle McCord, he's more of a game manager, and we saw that all year. He didn't really affect the game in any way to make Ohio State win. I think the same thing can be said about Devin Brown. He's more of a game manager, and from what it looked like from Missouri, they really kept him protected and didn't let him do much when it came to throwing the football. So I think that if he was going to be their starter, or even be their locked in number one,
mm,
there's no way they would have brought in two transfers and paid each of them about $1 million to
agreed.
come in to Ohio State. I think that your options are really between Will Howard and Julian Sayin. I think that's your one and two. I think three can be Devin Brown and four Air Noland. But, the big difference is going to be, do you want your veteran Will Howard or do you want the young gunslinger Julian Sayin? I think it depends. I think that they'll decide in camp ultimately. I don't think there's a set number one as of now. You'll probably have to wait till spring ball and even maybe after, maybe week one, till you actually find out who's the starter is. But something can be said about that is that Bill O'Brien is going to be their new play caller and offensive coordinator. I don't know necessarily if it's going to be him that's designing the plays and changing the offense to his scheme the way he likes it or not. But I know that he is going to be making the play calls instead of Ryan Day this year. So something can be said for that and the way he likes his system, the way he calls his plays. Now, I think that Julian Sayin fits the system in Ohio State a lot better as it is now. If they change it, Will Howard might fit it a little bit better. But, I think Sayin is probably the shoe in right now for QB1.
Yeah, I think that, with either way, you paid both these guys a lot of money. And at the end of the day, I have to think, I mean, this money came from someplace, so that people are expecting return on investment. Now, I think that where that could come in, I've got my 4-year-old talking Ninja Turtles over here, so excuse me. But the thing I think about with Howard, if he were the answer, and they've already seen, they've already theorized, they've already thought, if he were the answer, I don't think you go and spend another wad of money on Julian Sayin. Because that really sends a message, as to what it is that you're thinking about doing. So I think that I would not be surprised if Howard starts is opening day starter. You got the experiences there. You've made a big investment in him. There's lots of reasons to say that he will start. I think he can have success there. I think he can have success there. But the thing that I wonder about with Sain is, I mean, ultimately that he has got such an upside, and he's a person that I think that you could probably plug in, and it's going to work. It's going to work out for you. Now, is he going to have some bumps? Yeah, he's going to, because he's a first year guy. He hasn't played college ball yet, so there's a risk. Hey, shh, Lord have mercy. But the thing of it is I think that with saying, you might want to hold off, just given the situation. I don't know. I think if it gets tense, I think if Howard has a close game or two, I would not be surprised to see Sayin in there, because that guy's just getting better and better and better. And I think that, if you're Ryan Day, if maybe if the seat weren't hot, I think you might roll with Sayin. I really do. Uh, but I think because it is, I mean, if he's like me, you want to go with something that you can trust, and that Howard can win college football games, and he can definitely get you probably through that first stretch of the season, with very few bumps. And I think that that's what they need. They need people to relax a bit, and I think Will Howard can get that for you. But ultimately, I mean, Julian Sayin is the ultimate temptation. And I think that what spins out from there, and I don't know if we've said much about it. I mean, I think that, like with Howard, you are going to have to shift the way that you do things. And so I think that, like I think Chance, you said this earlier, that Ohio State, if they go with Will Howard, they might look a lot more like Michigan. There might be a more run heavy team and get their chunk yards through play action passes and the rollouts and things of that nature. That works clearly. And Ohio State has the roster, and the people on the field to make that kind of thing work out for them. But I think that, I'm just interested to see Sam. I think he's got something to offer. I think he's going to be a big name. He's going to be a great quarterback, for a long time. If barring, I guess, catastrophe. Um, the other thing that I would say is, I can't help but see Air Noland probably the development that he needs. He could get at Ohio State, I'm sure. But does he stay at Ohio State? And that's what I think is the most interesting thing about this quarterback, a competition that's no doubt going to be taking place and is taking place. Decisions are going to be made, and they're probably going to be made, like, in the next several months, into, the following off season. If I'm Air Noland and I see Julian Sayin there, and I want to be QB1, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think that, whether openly or not, they made that statement when they brought him in, because it's not like Julian Sayin wasn't a known, commodity. They know who he is. Everybody knows who he is. Aaron Nolan was with him, and he got beat, at the Elite 11. He knows who he is. When that dude shows up, you have to think, well, maybe my days are numbered. So I think that that's all going to pan itself out. What I'm interested in seeing is how quickly do they get Julian Sayin in, and can Will Howard be the answer all the way to the national championship? I don't know.
See,
I
my
really don't know.
thing My thing is this leads to the bigger discussion that we've wanted to have about Ohio State for a while, which is, you know, Ryan Day is on the hot seat. This is a winner go home year for him in a lot of people's eyes, and especially Ohio State's eyes. So, we've talked about the quarterbacks, but, what plays into this system is, they also brought in Caleb Downs. They brought in a O lineman from Alabama. Seth McLaughlin. They also brought in Quinshawn Judkins from Ole Miss, running back. They also brought in a tight end from Ohio, along with Will Howard. So I mean, you got to think they're ramping up to make a run here. And, when you think about that, you got two tier one running backs in Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson, who's staying for another year. So, I mean, it is looking like they're going to have two backs that can run the ball 10, 15 times a game. And they might be running the ball 30 times a game. You put Julian Sayin in there at starting quarterback, or even Will Howard, them guys are running the ball 5 times a game, if not more, as well. So I mean, it's looking like they're going to run the ball and rely on their defense a lot this year more than anything. I know they got some very good wide receivers in their recruiting class. They got the number one wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith, as well. So I mean, you got to think they didn't lose anything really from their defense. I know they lost, like Eichenberg, Steel Chambers, but I mean that ain't too much, especially when you bring in Caleb Downs. I think that's worth everything they lost and some, just to be a leader of the defense, to know what he knows, and work well with their defense where he can be split field, split safety, but he can call the whole defense. Just being back there, roaming around, being able to play any position on that defense. So I think that's going to give them a lot of flexibility to sit there and control the game, run the ball a lot. And, it don't matter if they have a game manager in there or not. I think as long as whoever, I think they go with whoever protects the ball more, is what I'm trying to say, because if they don't give the ball up, I think they score, 9 times out of 15. And that's about how many times they're going to get the ball every game. So, I mean, I think that's what they try to do this year. Run the clock, play like Michigan did this year, whether that be Will Howard or Julian Sayin. I think they're in a good position.
I think that there's obviously a conversation that we want to have about like a more inside look at these teams going into the 2024 season, and we're going to do some bigger breakdowns as far as full rosters. Bringing it back a little bit to the quarterback side of things, just for Ohio State, Will Howard is your proven guy who's going to win games. He's been in college football for 4 years. He's a grad transfer. He's been around the block, and he's been Kansas State starter. I think he was a starter. I want to say his first year, and then he lost a job, and then he got the job back in the 2022 season, and then he was the full one in 2023, and he has numbers to back him up. As far as Chance talking about protecting the ball, he was 24 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. So he threw a few picks. In one game, he threw 3 of them. Oklahoma State, which they lost, and that was a bad game for them. He threw 3 picks. So he's liable to turn the ball over every now and then, but he's still a guy that I think you trust to lead your team, or you can trust to lead your team. And with him at quarterback, I really do see Ohio State utilizing the quarterback run a lot. I think obviously Julian Sayin can absolutely run the football and do it very effectively, but him being the young guy who hasn't been around very long, I don't think you run him the same way that you can run Will Howard, because Julian still, his best threat is his arm. I think Will Howard's best threat is probably his legs, or at least it's about even. And and also he's a big guy, big body, and he's shown that he can take the hits. So with that, I mean, I think you see him utilized in that way if he is the starter. And kind of how Locke was talking about, I can almost see a situation where he is your day one starter. And as the season goes on, whether he gets banged up a little bit or they're just not having the offensive production they're really wanting, they're letting, Sayin sit behind Howard for a little while, and then they transition to Sayin when they think he's ready, or when he's needed, if Howard were to go down. I think that's probably your most likely scenario, just because, again, we kind of discussed Ryan Day needs to win. And obviously the biggest one on the schedule is Michigan. It is every year. And they're on a 3-game backslide. So they got to get that win. And in conversations with a couple very close friends that happen to be Ohio State fans, I posed a question to them. And I said, would you rather beat Michigan and not have a national championship next year, or lose to Michigan and win the national championship? And both of them instantly said, I'd rather beat Michigan. Now, I asked them, I was like, would that have been different, if I had asked you that last year and this year? And they said yes, because obviously every year you add a loss, it just adds it on as far as that rivalry goes. And they don't want to have a drought the way Michigan did previous to Harbaugh's streak. But that tells me the climate of where Ohio State is right now. They'd rather beat Michigan than win the national championship. That's just where a lot of their fans are. And I also asked, is that also like is that the whole community of Ohio State? And there's a large contingent of us who would much rather beat Michigan. So you got that one that you are absolutely, you need to win if you're Ryan Day. You also can't drop any of these games against smaller teams. And then, of course, the big matchup is Oregon and Ohio State. That's another one it's not necessarily must win, because the Big Ten is throwing away their division, so it's just best record for the championship. So it's not must win, but you have to win these big games to prove that you. Again, this is kind of crazy, but to prove that you belong there as the head coach, to me, and I think to all of us, Ryan Day is like 50. He's 56-8 as a head coach. I think he has the highest win percentage right now in all of college football. And yet we're talking about him being on a hot seat because of the games that he lost. So all of that being said, I feel like you got to go with a guy that you trust with the experience before you just you throw the freshman, you throw the young guy in to be the leader, even though I think Sayin can handle it. And I would rather see Sayin, but I think they probably go Will Howard, and then maybe they transition into Sayin, or maybe by necessity they need Sayin. And I think the guy that we obviously are not talking about as much with this, with Air Noland, transfer. There's a second transfer portal window that happens in April, and I expect to see one, if not two, of the 5 quarterbacks on their roster to hop into the portal. Now, I don't know the situation with Will Howard, because he's a grad transfer, so I'm not sure if he can hop back in and go somewhere else. I don't necessarily expect that, but I do expect maybe Devin Brown and then Air Noland to hop in the transfer portal and try and go somewhere else where they're going to be able to have a better shot at being QB1. Because with Devin Brown, both, or with him and Air Noland, you got a guy who is the same age or close to the same age as you. He's in your class, and he's better than you. I don't see them getting the spot over Julian Sayin, so I expect them to probably leave in that April window.
I think one thing you got to say in all of it is that it's going to be wild in Columbus. I mean, this is going to be one more story, one more year. And the thing that I think that, like when you're talking about, the folks who follow Ohio State football, I followed it a long time. I mean, a lot longer than most Southerners, I guess, have ever followed Northern teams, because I mean, I've kind of been a lifelong, Big Ten person. I've always been interested in them. But the thing that I think that nobody who has followed Ohio State football, and especially the ones who are really devoted to it, what they don't want to see happen again are the John Cooper years. And I guarantee you that if you talk to Ohio State fans of a certain age, that's what's in the back of their mind. Because man, Cooper could absolutely just beat the ground with every team but Michigan. And now, he did get, he got one win there in the 90s whenever that was the year they lost to Saban in the Michigan